Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Tet. Today we're going to be talking about shtar and what you write in the shtar and who he gives the shtar to. But first, we've been talking about cases where a man proposes to a woman in unusual circumstances, and she gives a response, but her response is not clear. Like if he says, "Here, I propose to you by Haret Mikudeshet with this piece of bread," and then she says, "Oh, you know what? Throw that bread to the dog." Does that mean yes? If it's her dog, that means yes. If it's some random dog, that means no. Or to the poor person, or she throws it into the fire, and cases like that. So we're going to see a few more cases, and that where similarly we're not sure what she means by that. A certain man, he's selling beads of glass. A woman comes and says, "Oh, look at these beautiful beads. Can I have one string of beads?" And the man says, "If I give it to you, will you be mikudeshet to me?" And she says, "Haba mi haba, give." Now, what does that mean when she says give? Is that a yes, right? Yes, I agreed to marry you for these beads. Or is she saying, just give it to me, right? And she does not meaning like she's saying it in an annoyed way, or in a way of mocking her. Come on, please, just give it, right? So what's her tone? We don't have the tone here, but from the double language, it sounds like she doesn't mean it. And therefore, Amar Rav Chama kol haba mi haba lav kilum hu. Anytime you say this double language, like give, then we assume she does not mean to get married. We're going to see two more cases, same. You have a man, he was drinking wine in a store, he's in a bar drinking wine. A woman comes in and says, can I have a cup of wine? And he says, if I give you a cup of wine, will you be mikudeshet to me? And she says, give me to drink, give it to drink. Amar Rav Chama, kol ashkuye ashkiyan lav kelum hu. Rav Chama says this language, although he has a quick pickup line, I'll be mikudeshet, right? He's jump straight to the end. When she says this double language, give me to drink, this does not mean anything. She's just saying, come on, just give me a drink. I don't have to marry you for a drink. Another case of a man, he was picking dates from a tree. Woman comes and says, "Oh, those look like such nice dates. Throw me a couple." Okay, I'll throw it. If I throw it to you, will you be mekadesh to me with these couple of dates? Right, that's it. All you need is a couple of dates, and then you're ready to get married. Shedi mishta. She says, right, throw. Amarav Zevid kol shedi mishta lav kilumhu. We assume she does not mean it. She's saying, oh, come on, just throw me a couple of dates, just throw, and there is no kiddushin. Good. Hab ashke ushte mahu. Now the next question is, what if she says it only once, right? Give me a drink, throw without the double language. Then is that better? Amar Ravina mikudesh. Ravina says yes. Then she's more sincere, right? Will you be my wife for these couple of dates? And she says, give it to me. Yes, then that is mikudesh. The double language makes it sound like she's mocking. Rav Sama bar Rakta Amar Tagade Malka ena mikudeshet. However, Rav Sama disagrees and says she swears by the king's crown. No, there's no kiddushin here. Whether he says double language or single language, it doesn't mean it. Look at the circumstance, right? This guy is just giving a quick pickup line. Who knows if he even means it? He means it. Let's say he means it. She says, "Oh, come on, just give it." Even if she says it once, right? There's no commitment here. There's no kiddushin. Vilchata ena mikudeshet, and that is the halacha. There is no kiddushin whether you say it twice or once. And then we're going to have a quick summary of all the halachot that we said since yesterday. Vilchata shira'eh la serichi shuma. Yesterday we saw a machloket whether if he's a man's mikadesh a wife with a piece of silk, does he have to get it professionally appraised and tell her this is appraised for 50 dinar or not? Halacha is he does not have to be appraised. It has to be worth at least a peruta, but you don't need an appraisal. Rabbi Elazar said that if a man says, you are mekudeshet li with 100 zuz, and he gives her one, and the rest will come later. We interpret that language to mean on condition that he pays the rest later. So, but a condition takes place right away. So she's mikudeshet immediately upon receiving the 1 dinar. She can't. That's it. She can't change her mind. Unless retroactively, if he doesn't pay, there won't be Kiddushin. But retroactively, if he does pay retroactively, then there is Kiddushin. That is the halacha. Different if he says Zor or if he's counting it out. And if he says Zor, counting it out, then he has to give the full amount because that's not a condition. There, it's evident that he's giving it now. Halacha is also like Rava, who said in the name of Rav Nachman, that if he says, I'm going to give you Mekudeshet li with 100 dinar, I don't have any cash on me right now, so here's a collateral, hold on to my watch. And then, tomorrow, I'll give you the money and take back the watch. That's not valid because collateral in that case, she doesn't own it, right? So he doesn't give her any money. He didn't give her anything that she's going to keep, and therefore he didn't give her anything at all. So there's no kiddushin. All right, next case. Now we get to the shtar. Tinor banan. Bishtar kesar. If you wanted to do kiddushin with the shtar, how does it work exactly? Katav lo al haniyad o al acheres afal pi she'en bo shaveh peruta. So first you need some writing material. It could be paper, earthenware, even if it's not worth even a peruta. That's okay. Only for kesef it has to be worth a peruta. Bashtar works in a completely different mechanism. It's not the value of the piece of paper, it's what's written on it. What's written on it? Bitecha mikudeshet li, bitecha meoreset li, bitecha li li'intu, harezo mikudeshet. We're assuming a case of a minor girl whose father has the right to marry her off. And so in this case, the groom is going to write to the father, your daughter is hereby sanctified to me, hereby betrothed unto me, or your daughter will be my wife. And he writes that in the shtar, and he gives it, it sounds like he's giving it to the father. We'll see, actually, he can give it to the girl also, as long as the father is in agreement. So that is Kiddushin. That's it. It sounds like you don't have to say anything. You don't have to say, Haret Mikudeshet li b'shtar zo, right? Because it's actually written in the document. Just by handing the document is the same as saying those words, and the father receiving the document is accepting them. Matkifla Rabbi Zera bar Memal. Ha la dameh haishtara lishtar zibineh. And now we have a question. How come this works differently than a bill of sale? In a bill of sale, hata mocher koteb lo sadi mechura lecha. The seller always writes the shtar. He's the seller. He's initiating, and he says, I own this field. This field is sold to you. So the seller gives the deed to the buyer. But here it's the husband who's let's call him the buyer, right? He's not buying financially, but he's buying the right to marry from the father, and yet he writes, your daughter is mikudeshet to me. If it was parallel, then it should be the father. He's like the seller, should write, here, behold, my daughter is given over to you as a wife, just like an owner of a field says, my field is given over to you. So how come for Kiddushin we write it the wrong way, or the opposite way of a bill of sale? Amar Rava hata minyana dikra v'hacha minyana dikra. Rava explains, both types of contracts are based on the context of Pisukim. And he quotes 2 Pisukim. Hatam ketiv umachar me'achuzato b'mocher tala rachamana. In the case of someone selling a field, this is regarding redeeming a field and Yovel. So if it says, if a person sells his ancestral land, you see that a seller has to initiate the process. So that's why a seller is going to write the document. Hacha ketiv ki yikach be'bal tala rachamana. But when it comes to marriage, the Pasuk in Devarim says, if a man takes a woman, so the man is the one initiating the process, and that's why for Kiddushin, he has to be the one that writes the shtar and says, your daughter is betrothed unto me. Okay, good. So that seems like a nice answer. But now Gemara asks, you chose these two Pesukim from Vayikra and Devarim, but there are other Pesukim that say the opposite. Hatam name ketiv sadot bekesef yiknu. In Yirmiyah it says, people will buy fields with money. The context of this Pesukim, actually very beautiful Pesukim, Hashem is saying to Bnei Israel, just like I brought all the evil upon you, I'm going to bring good. I'm going to bring you back to the land. And your fields shall again be purchased in this land that you say now is desolate. There's nobody there. Everybody's going to go. You're going to see the real estate prices are going to be sky high. Came true, right? Go try to buy something in Yerushalayim or Tel Aviv now. And then it says, Sadot bakesef yiknu, fields will be purchased with money. And they're going to deeds written and sealed, witnesses. So from here we can learn the normal, legal way that you purchase a field, right? And it says here yiknu, meaning that they will be bought. So it sounds here like the buyer is the one initiating, and therefore he would be the one that would write the contract. So this is a contradiction of what Rava just said. Okay, how are we going to answer it? Karebe yikanu. Instead of reading it yikanu, which it says in the Masoretic vocalization, read it and instead as a hif'il, yikanu will sell. Will cause to be bought. Cause to be bought means to sell. So you know what? We could just repunctuate this word. All right. Well, my tama karit be yikanu mishum dichtiv umachar. So how come you're repunctuating this word in Yirmiyah? Maybe because the pasuk back in Vayikra says umachar. Okay, so we're going to rely on a pasuk in the Torah, and that's going to be the main pasuk. What are we going to do with the contradiction in the pasuk in Nevi'im? All right, we'll resolve the contradiction. We're not going to change the consonants, but we'll change the vocalization. So that's what you did. All right, I understand. I'll accept it. But hachiname karibe ki hikach. Dichtiv et biti natati laish hazeh. Sorry, you see yakach or yakiach. So here also, the pasuk that you quoted from Devarim, ki kach ish isha, that proves that a man initiates. Hold on, there's another pasuk in Devarim that says, at biti, a father says, I've given my daughter over to you. This is in the context of Mosi Shemra, when the groom claims that he did not find Betulim. So here you see, and this is in the Torah also, a father initiates and gives his daughter. And so since you have now a contradiction between these two Pesukim, we would, just like you just repunctuated a Pasuk, I can also repunctuate a Pasuk and say, instead of ki yikach ish isha, read it ki yakiach ish isha, if a man is taken by a woman. And so then it'll be the other way around. And in fact, according to this, biti natati, that would sound like a father would initiate and he would write the document. Behold, I give my daughter over to you, just like an owner of a field. So you know what? From the Pisukim, there are Pisukim on both sides, and if you're going to start revocalizing Pisukim, you could do it for both selling and for Kiddushin, and come up with any conclusion that you want. So the Pisukim are not definitive. Rather, Rava must have meant to say that this is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's an oral tradition that when you're selling a land, the seller writes the language. When you're doing Kiddushin, the buyer, meaning the husband, writes the language. And the rabbis just used Pisukim as a mnemonic device for support, and that's why Rava quoted those two Pisukim. But you're right, it's not really based on the Pisukim, because you can find opposite Pisukim. All right, that's one answer. You could also argue that in Vayikra, in the same context, that same chapter, so even though it says here, fields will, with money, where people will buy. So over here it sounds like it's the buyer, but in that very context above, Yeremiah is told by Hashem to go and buy a field from his cousin. Then this is before right before the destruction, and it's like crazy. You're going to buy a field now when everybody's going to exile, and he does, to show that one day we're going to come back. Hold on to that deed. And in that pasuk it says, "Va'eten et Sefer HaMiknah. V'kach et Sefer HaMiknah. Yirmiyah says, I took the deed of sale. Yirmiyah took it. He's the buyer. That means that the seller, his cousin Hanamel, wrote it. So you see, even in this very context, it's much more explicit in the story here that the seller is the one that wrote the document and Yirmiyah bought it. So even though it says Yiknu, that's not really that's not as explicit as this. And so even in that context, it says so. So you know what? We even could rely on the Pisukim, and those Pisukim that we brought are pretty good proofs, right? Although you could always re-punctuate it, but you don't have to. The Pisukim in Yirmiyah and the Pasuk in Vayikra talk about selling. That's the main thing that you do is sell. And the main Pasuk of marriage is Ki Yikach Ish Isha. The husband initiates. And that's the reason why the husband will write the shtar. Okay, all good. Now, V'amar Rava Amar Rav Nachman, Katav lo al haniyad ol acheres. Afa pi she'en bo shaveh peruta, b'techa mikudeshet li, b'techa meoreset li, b'techa li li'intu, ben al yedei aviha, ben al yedei asmaha, mikudeshet mida'ato, vehu shelo bagra. So now a summary. If a husband writes on paper or on earthenware, they would do that often. They had, pots that would get broken and they're not worth much anyway. It's easy to make a new one. But from the pottery shards, you can use them. It's like, the back of envelopes that you are used envelopes. You don't waste the paper. So they would use these pot shards to write things on, which is actually a good thing that they did that because they last forever. So archaeologists can find lots of things from thousands of years old written on pot shards. So if he writes it on one of these things, even if it doesn't have it's not worth a peruta, that's okay. And he writes it to the father, your daughter is mikudeshet to me, your daughter is betrothed to me, your daughter will be my wife. And he gives it either to the father or to her. That's fine, as long as it's mida'ato, with the consent of the father. And all this is true when she is a minor. So when she's a minor, she can still receive it, but the father has to okay it. And it's written in this language because it's the father who's agreeing and giving over his daughter. However, if she is an adult, then it's different. Katav la'al niyar ol acheres, af al pi she'en bo shaveh peruta, הרי את מקודשת לי, הרי את לי לאינטו, הרי את מאורסת לי, מקודשת, בין על ידי אביה, בין על ידי עצמה, מדעתה, והוא שבגרה. Same thing on paper and earthenware, even if it's not worth a peruta. And now he writes, behold, you are sanctified to me, you are my wife, you are betrothed unto me. That works. And it doesn't matter if he gives it to the father or to her, but it has to be with her consent if she is an adult. So even if she's an adult and she consents, if he gives it to the father can accept it on behalf of his daughter. But since she's an adult, she has to consent to it. So in either case, you could give it to the father or the daughter. But if it's a minor, then you write it. The language in it will be you're right. I'm taking your daughter, and the father has to agree to it. If it's an adult, then she has to agree to it, and the language is, behold, you are mekudeshet to me. We now continue with another detail of writing the shtar. Does it have to be written lishma? Ba'er bi Shimon ben Lakish, shtar erusin sheketavo shelo lishma mahu. A man writes a shtar Kiddushin, hare'at mikudeshet li, and he has in mind Sarah, because he is intending to marry Sarah. Turns out, Sarah breaks up with him, but he has the shtar already, so now can you use the same one for Rivka, who now he wants to marry? Can he do that? Or does it have to be written lishma? I had in mind when writing this document to give it to Sarah, but now she's out of the picture. Now I have to tear that up. I have to write another one when eventually I marry Rivka. That's the question. Mahu havayot liyisiot makshinan ma yitzia bainan lishma af havaya bainan lishma. On the one hand, maybe we should compare entering the marriage with exiting a marriage, and just like when you exit a marriage with a get, the get has to be written for this particular woman, even if a man has two wives with the same name. He has to, no good. He has to write it for this particular woman. Otherwise, you can't use it. So too for Kiddushin. has to be written for this particular woman. You need lishma. Or maybe we should compare all the various types of kiddushin. Just like for kesef, you don't need a coin that's minted for the sake of this particular woman to use. You just use a regular coin that's minted by the government for our general use. So too, a shtad does not have to be written for this particular woman. You could take any shtad, you could just buy one off in the market and use it because it's the same as kesef. Those are the two sides. After he asked the question, Resh Lakish answered it as well. Because the pasuk has in the same pasuk, she will leave one husband and then come and marry a second husband, is juxtaposing the way you leave with the way you come in. And just like when you leave with a get has to be written lishma, yes, a shtar kiddushin has to be written for the sake of this particular woman. Good. Itmar. Ketavo lishma v'shelo mida'ata. Now the distinction between writing it for her sake and with her consent. Right? I can write it for her sake, even though she doesn't know or she has not yet agreed to marry me. Right? We went out on 2 dates. We just saw that 2 dates is enough. And so I'm ready. So I'm gonna write a shtar kitubat, a shtar kiddushin, to have it ready. And I'm hoping, on the next date I'll make a nice proposal, but she has not agreed yet to the marriage. Maybe even she said no. But can I write it? And eventually when she agrees, then I'll give it to her. Is that okay? That's fine. As long as written lishma, as we proved it has to be lishma, she doesn't have to consent at the time of the writing. She has to consent, of course, once she receives it. She has to receive it and say, I'm mikudeshet. You can't do kiddushin without someone's will. But at the time of writing, she doesn't have to agree. Rapapa ve'Rav Shedevya amre ena mikudeshet. Rapapa and Rav Shedevya say, no, it has to be written also with her consent. You have to first propose, you're okay with marrying me? Good. All right, let's go to the scribe, and then he'll write it. Amar Rav Papa, ema ta'amadidhu ve'ema ta'amadidi. Rav Papa says, I'm going to offer their reasoning, that of Ravan Ravina, the Semikudeshet, and then I'll tell you also my reasoning. It's very nice of Rav Papa to explain the reasoning of the opponents even before his own. Like Bet Hillel used to mention the opinion of Bet Shammai before their own. It's a sign of humility. Ema ta'amaditu. Tichtiv yase avaita makish avaya l'siyamais yalishma v'shelo midata afayavaya name lishma v'shelo midata. Ravan Ravina can say that why is it okay? Because kiddushin is going to be like gitin. Just like when leaving a marriage with a get, the get has to be written for her sake, but does not have to be written with her agreement, with her consent. A get works on a doraita level even without her consent. So the husband, that's okay. He has to write it lishma. This is for the sake of this particular wife, even though she does not want to get a get, doesn't know about it. Doesn't matter. That's a good get. The same thing for kiddushin. Kiddushin has to be written for her sake, but does not have to be written with her consent. Same, just like a get. When you give it to her, she has to agree to receive it and be mikudeshet, but not at the time of writing. Now that's the other opinion. Ve'ema tamadidi. Rav Papa says my own opinion. I say it's not good. Is v'asav ha'ita makish havaya l'si'ah. I'm also going to compare gitin and kiddushin. Ma yisi'ah ba'ainan dat makneh av havaya ba'ainan dat makneh. In both of them, you need the consent of the one giving over the owner, transferring ownership. The owner has to consent, has to agree. In the case of gitin, the husband owns the wife, but owns the right to be married to the wife, and so he has to agree that he wants to. For a get, it has to be with the husband's free will. He only then is the get valid. Good, that's true. And the same thing for kiddushin has to be with the knowledge and consent of the giver. And in that case of kiddushin, the giver is the woman. She's giving herself. She's agreeing to give the right to marry over to this man. Therefore, it has to be with his consent. It is the same as Gitin, except when with Kiddushin, she's the one giving over the right to marry. With Gitin, the husband, owns the right to marry and is giving it back to her. But in both cases, it does have to be Rin Lishma. In the case of Kiddushin, the marriage contract, even though he is the one writing it, has to be done Lishma, with her in mind and with her consent. We now challenge the opinions of Rava and Ravina from a Mishnah. They're the one that says the Kiddushin works and you don't need her consent during the writing of the shtar. Me'etibeh. En kotvin shetare erusin v'nisuin ela mida'at shenehen. This Mishnah says you cannot write a document of Kiddushin or Nisuin unless you have the consent of both parties. Shtar Nisuin, we don't know what it is yet. To do Nisuin, you need chuppah. You don't do Nisuin with a shtar. So we're not sure what that is. But assuming shtar erusin is what we're talking about, a shtar for Kiddushin, it says it has to be with her consent. That proves that Papa is against the other opinion. My love shtar erusin v'nisuin mamash. So are we not talking about what we usually understand as a shtar to do Kiddushin and I guess Nisuin along with that? We're talking about the same thing. We say no, la shetare pesikta uchtrav gidel amar rav. Now we're talking about documents of stipulation, about the details of the dowry and what you're going to bring into the marriage, like the tenaim, and the amar rav gidel amar rav kama ata noten li bincha kach vekach lebitecha kach vekach amdu v'kiddushu kanu hen adebrim aniknim ba'amida. As Rav Gidel said in the name of Rav, the parents, when they're arranging the marriage, will ask each other. The parents of the groom will say, of the bride will say, how much are you bringing into the marriage and giving your son as a bride price? This much. And then the other side says, how much are you going to bring into the marriage and give to your daughter as the dowry? And they say this much. And they agree on how many camels and everything. And then they go and they do Kiddushin. So that acts as an acquisition in and of itself, even if they just say it. That speech, but then it's followed by an action of Kiddushin, that effectuates their commitment, and they can't renege on that. So that's what we're talking about. Over here it says that they can do it with just Devarim, but they can also write it down. So when it says here, Shtare Erusin V'Nisuin, it's talking about a document that lists all the things, the agreement, the financial agreement, before the wedding of what they're going to each contribute. That has to be done with the consent of both parties. That's what it's talking about. It's not talking about the shtar of Kiddushin that we've been talking about, a shtar to effectuate Kiddushin. Okay, ube bi'ah min alan. Now back to doing Kiddushin with bi'ah. What's the source of it? We already saw a source earlier. Ki yikach ish isha uba'ala. From the word yikach, we learned that means money, and then it says uba'ala. That means you could do Kiddushin with bi'ah. But now we're going to see a different source and ask why we need both. Amar bi'abu amar Yochanan Damar Kira Be'ulat Baal Melamesh Na'asala Baal Al Yedeh Be'ila. We learn it from this pasuk here. If there's a man Shochev Misha that sleeps with a woman who is Be'ulat Baal, meaning a married woman, they're committing adultery, so they both get the death penalty. Okay, so now instead of saying married, how do you say married? Be'ulat Baal. This double language. What did we learn from that? That someone becomes a Baal, he becomes a husband through Be'ilah. So that means that you can do Kiddushin, acquire a woman, and be her husband through Be'ilah. Good. Amar le Rabbi Zera Rabbi Abhu. V'amri la Resh Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Ke'ora zo sheshana Rabbi u'ba'ala melamed shenikret bebi'ah. And now we have a question, a challenge against Rabbi Yochanan's source. And some say Rabbi Zera asked Rabbi Abu, some say Resh Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan. What's wrong with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's derivation, who learned it from the pasuk and the regular pasuk, Kikach ish isha ub'ala? That means, that's in the context of taking a woman. It says ub'ala, that you do Kiddushin with bi'ah. Right? So why do you need another pasuk, Rabbi Yochanan? And the answer is, if I had only that pasuk, I might have thought that you need two things in order to do Kiddushin. Ki kach ishisha, you have to give her a coin, Ub'ala, and also bi'ah. You need both steps just for Kiddushin. That's why I need the pasuk here in Devarim 22 that says Be'ulat Ba'al. She becomes his wife just through bi'ah. We're talking about Kiddushin, just through bi'ah. It doesn't say anything about kesef. So that's why I need this pasuk. Now, we challenge this answer. Matkif la Rabbi Abba bar Memal. Im ken na'ara me'orasa damar chamana biskila hechi mashkachat la. We have a case of na'ara me'orasa. Happens to be the very next pasuk. Here, na'ara betula morasa leish. If there's a young woman who's a betula, but she is me'orasa, and then someone is with her, so someone takes her, so he gets. If it's adultery and willing, then uskaltam bavanim, they get sekila. Now, how could you have a possibility of a woman who was me'oreset, right, mikudeshet, and she's also a betula? If you say that in order to do, if you say as a hava amina, that's what Rabbi Yochanan just said. If we had only the pasuk of kikach ish isha, then we would say you have to do both kesef and bi'ah in order to do kiddushin. But if every kiddushin required kesef and bi'ah, then you can never have a ne'ara me'orasa who's also a betula, because she will have already done bi'ah, and then she wouldn't be a betula anymore. But the Torah has a case of na'ara me'orasa, who's a betula, right? So how could you ever have such a case? We elaborate further on the question. Idak desh v'adar ba'ir be'olahi, idak desh v'la ba'ir lav kilumhu. If he did kiddushin, meaning with money, and he did bi'ah, regular bi'ah, then she's a be'ula, so that she's not a me'orasa betula, she's not a betula anymore. And if she did kiddushin and didn't do bi'ah, she only did kiddushin with money, then according to your hava amina, meaning if you only had ki yikach ish isha, and that means that you have to have two steps in order to do kiddushin. Well, if you only did one step, you did money but not bi'ah, then she's not mikudeshet, she's not a ne'ara me'orasa. So how could you have a hava amina? It's all back to why do you need both pesukim according to the Rabbi Yochanan and the pasuk of ki yikach ish isha? Because I would have thought that you need kiddushin and bi'ah. No, it's impossible because we have a law of na'ara me'orasa. So what's the case of na'ara me'orasa betula according to this hava amina that you need kiddushin and bi'ah? Amru Rabbanan kamed Abaye mashkachada kigon sheba'aleh arusa shelo kedarka. So the rabbi said to Abaye, maybe it's the students that proposed the following answer. It could be if the groom has bi'ah shelo kedarka. He gives her kesef kiddushin, she accepts it, and then he would have bi'ah shelo kedarka. On the one hand, that is an act of bi'ah, so that it acquires her and she is mikudeshet. On the other hand, it doesn't break her betulim, so she is still a betula. Okay, so that seems like a good answer. But Abaye rejects it. Amalu Abaye ad kan peligi Rabbi v'Rabbanan ela be'acher. Aval Baal dibra hakol im ba'aleh shelo kedarka asa'ah be'ola. Abaye explains that bi'ah shelo kedarka is a strange thing legally, because everyone agrees that there's a machloket, as we're going to see in a second, between Rabbi and Rabbanan, and they only disagree if a foreign guy, meaning not the husband, not the groom, if he has bi'ah shelo kedarka, there's a question: is that considered that bi'ah that breaks her betulim, or that makes her a be'ula, or she remains a betula? We'll see that machloket in a second. But everyone agrees that if the groom or husband himself performs bi'ah shelo kedarka, that she becomes a be'ula thereby. Whether she physically has betulim or not is independent of the question of whether legally she is considered a be'ula or a betula. And so if it's the husband himself who's doing this and gives kesef, and then bi'ah shelok, even if it's shelok kedarka, she's still considered a be'ola. And so once again, you can never have a na'ara me'orasa who's also a betula. So he rejects this answer. Now we just have to explain what this machloket is. Maihi tetanya ba'u aleha asara anashim ve'adayin hi betula. Let's say you have a na'ara me'orasa betula, and 10 other men come and have bi'ah with her, and she remains a betula. How could she remain a betula? We'll see. Kulan beskila. They all get sikila. So she can remain a betula physically if it's all bi'ah shelo kedarka. And the law is all of them get sikila. In other words, she remains a betula the entire time, from the first to the 10th guy, because it's all shelo kedarka. So she's a betula, and the punishment for na'ara betula me'orasa of adultery is that they all get sikila. Rabbi Omer ani harishon beskila v'chulan b'chanek. Rabbi says, I disagree. The first one was going to get sikila, because at that point she's a na'ara me'orasa betula, let's say normal halacha of kiddushe kesef, and so she's a betula. The first guy who has bi'ah shelo kedarka, he gets sikila because she's a betula. After that, she's considered a be'ula, dependent of her physical betulim being there, and so the rest of them also get the death penalty, but they get chenek. Chenek is the punishment for adultery of a be'ula. Sikila is the punishment for adultery with a betula, na'ara me'orasa betula. Okay, so you see that there is a machloket here between Rabbanan and Rabbi regarding a foreign guy who's committing adultery. Is that act considered is she considered thereby a be'ula or not? But regarding a groom himself who's doing it, everyone would agree, even Rabbanan would agree that is an act of bi'ah that makes her a be'ula. So we reject that answer. We need a new answer. So an easier answer is you do kiddushin with shtar. So the na'ara me'orasa betula, that halacha in the Torah could be a case where a husband does kiddushin with a shtar, and just like a shtar, all you need is a shtar to end a marriage with a divorce. So too, all you need is a shtar to enter a divorce, right? No one would think that you need shtar plus bi'ah. So we solve that problem. Na'ara me'orasa betula could happen with a shtar, but I still might have a hava amina that if you're doing kiddushe kesef, then you need two steps, kesef and bi'ah, in order to do kiddushin. That's what I would have thought if I only had ki kach ish isha. That's why I need the pasuk from Devarim 22, be'ulat Baal, to teach me that bi'ah by itself can also act as kiddushin, and kesef by itself can also effectuate kiddushin. Now that we've established that Rabbi Yochanan learns Kiddushe Bi'ah from Be'olat Baal, because Kikach Ishisha would be insufficient, because then you think maybe you need both Kesef and Bi'ah. Now we ask Rabbi Yochanan, Hai Uba'ala, Mai Avid Le. Why does he need the Pasuk at all? Kikach Ishisha Uba'ala. Why do we need that word at all? Because I know Kiddushe Bi'ah from the pasuk be'ulat Baal. So ahu mi ba'ale zo niknet bebi'ah ve'en amah ibriya niknet bebi'ah. Rabbi Yochanan learns a halacha that a wife can be acquired with bi'ah, but an ama ivriya cannot be acquired with bi'ah. An ama ivriya is acquired by money, like she's a slave. Even though ama ivriya the intention is when she becomes an adult, she's supposed to be married to the owner or the owner's son. So there is an aspect of kiddushin, kind of like here, but it's not really kiddushin, because if he doesn't marry her and he ends up marrying someone else, then she goes free. So I need to learn ki kach ish isha. If a man wants to marry a woman, regular free woman, then uba'ala, you can use kiddush kesef, or you can use bi'ah for that. But amay no, only kesef, not bi'ah. Now, why would I have thought that it's okay to use bi'ah? I might have thought a kal vachomer from yevama. A yevama cannot be acquired with money, but rather only bi'ah. So an amay who can be acquired with money, all the more so, she is more acquirable. She should be able to be acquired with bi'ah. But then we reject that, because a Yavama already has a connection. She's already bound to the Yavam by her husband dying. She already has an obligation, and he has an obligation to marry her, to do Yibum, or if not, Chalitza. So that's why Bi'ah works there, whereas with an Ama Ivriya, this is talking about just a young girl who's totally free, and the father needs to sell her off, so she's not bound in any way to the future owner. So it's totally different from Yibum. So that destroys that Kal Vachomer. Rather, Sakal Dachamina, Hoil V'chatav Im Acheret Yikach Lo, Hikisha HaKatuv LaAcheret. Ma Acheret Mikneya Bebi'ah Af Amavriya Mikneya Bebi'ah Ka Mashma'lan. I might have thought that the Amavriya is compared to another wife. It says in the Pasuk that if this owner, if he chooses to marry the Amavriya, okay, good. But if not, if he takes another wife, then he has to let the Ama Ivriya go free. Or if he marries another wife, he still has to provide for she'era, kisuta, ve'onata for this Ama Ivriya. Anyway, the point is that it says if he marries another besides Ama Ivriya, so it talks about Ama Ivriya and regular marriage in same pasuk back to back. So just like with the other marriage that's with bi'ah, so to Ama Ivriya you might think is with bi'ah, and that's why I need the pasuk yikach Ish Isha Uba'ala. Bi'ah only works for marriage. It does not work for Ama Ivriya. So that's what Rabbi Yochanan does with that pasuk. Now Rabbi who learns Bi'ah Kiddushe Bi'ah from Kikach Ish Isha Uba'ala, where is he going to learn this halacha? Haisavara Minale, that Ama Ivriya cannot be acquired with Bi'ah. Im ken nichtav rachamana Uba'al Mai Uba'ala Shema Mina Tarteh. The pasuk could have just said Kikach Ish Isha Uba'al, short form. So why does it say the longer form ub'ala? Of course, in Peshat, it means uba'al ota. You kind of need that pronoun. But nevertheless, this is a longer form. So he will learn two things from this pasuk. Number one, that you can perform marriage with bi'ah, and that it only works for a wife and not for an ama ivriya. Good. Rava Damar bar ahina asperali kikach ish isha ubala kiddushin hamesurin lebi'ah havu kiddushin kiddushin she'en mesurin lebi'ah lo havu kiddushin ma'ika lememar. Rava learned from bar ahina that we need to learn something else from this pasuk. Pasuk kikach ish isha ubala means that kiddushin is effective when it can lead eventually to bi'ah during nisu'in. But if you do kiddushin, and it's in such a situation where that kiddushin cannot lead to legal bi'ah in marriage, then the kiddushin is also invalid. For example, if a man gives kiddushin to one of two sisters, not knowing which one it is, then he can never consummate that marriage because he's not sure if it's this sister that he did kiddushin with. He's not allowed to go have bi'ah with the other sister, and vice versa. So that would be kiddushin that cannot be followed up with bi'ah and is therefore invalid. So how do we know that? Because the pasuk says kikach ish isha. If you do kiddushin with kesef, it has to be able to lead to ub'ala. So now we have this law that we need to learn from the same pasuk. Ma'ik alemamad. What's Rava, who learned this law from this pasuk? What's he going to do? How's he going to learn everything from one pasuk? And the answer is yes, you can. Im ken nichtov kera o be'ala mai ub'ala shema mina kulehu. The pasuk could have said kikach ish isha or be'ala, if it was just if it wanted to teach that you could do kiddushin with kesef, kikach ish isha, or you could also do bi'ah, it could have said o. Why say u and both? So from that u, just from that one letter, we can learn this halacha that kiddushe kesef has to be able to potentially lead to legal bi'ah, and from the longer version of the word ub'alah, we can learn the halacha that bi'ah works for a wife but not for an ama ivriya, and from the word itself, just ba'al, we can learn that you can do kiddushin with kesef and also with bi'ah. So we can learn all three of the halachot, all from one word, one from ba'al, one from the vav at the beginning, and one from a he at the end. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.